How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. Well, that's good to hear.
I know everybody else is smiling. Look.
I know. I guess that means they're good as well. Having some audio issues, which is always fun. All right, give me one more minute. Let some people in here. Popular topic, I see. All right, let's get started. How is everyone doing?
Doing well.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you. AJ, good to hear your voice, man.
You too, brother.
We've got the lone 5 of you on camera. Everyone else is afraid to show their faces. So good
I don't know how
job.
to do it.
And good job to Jill, Camille, Celeste, Colby, Waverly. Oh, Scott's showing his pretty face. There we go. All right. There's AJ. Look at us go. All right. Got a handful of people jumping on here. Make sure I get everyone before we get started. So, all right. So, typically what happens, this is the third, is it? What's today? October something? October 15th.
20th.
22nd. What day is it?
20th.
Yeah.
20th. What month am I looking at?
Wrong one.
Interesting. It's Tuesday, not Thursday. That's right. So we got the third Tuesday of the month. So typically what we do the third Tuesday of the month is we go through the purchase and sale agreement. And then on the fourth Tuesday, we have a general session. Well, I will not be in town next week. We will be on vacation. So we're going to combine 3 and 4 this month. And we're going to jump into a situation that we're seeing quite a bit of these days. I don't anticipate this being a lengthy discussion. However, if questions, anything comes up, I'll be here as long as we need to be in order to get all the questions answered. So by a show of either a thumbs up or a wave or a yes in the chat box, who has found themselves in a multiple offer situation recently? I've got one person reacting. That's good. 2 people.
Yes.
There we go. Awesome. Okay.
Yes.
So have you ever had a situation where you represent a seller and you start negotiating and at some point the seller does not agree to move forward with any more negotiations? So basically they reject the final offer or counter offer from the buyer. Anybody ever had that?
Yes.
Okay, a couple of yeses on that. So for those of you who have had that, every time you've had it, you have sent a rejection of offer form, correct?
I thought it was only needed when you rejected the initial offer outright. Is that incorrect?
It is incorrect, but you are not alone on that one. So
Okay.
because I know that you guys love nothing more than to study real estate license law in the state of South Carolina, I've taken upon myself to show you exactly where you can find the rules. And then what we're going to do is how to handle this situation. And then in particularly, I really want to kind of have more of a mastermind of how to handle a multiple offer situation, because I think that's really where you're going to be earning your money in this market. So I am going to share my screen. And currently you should be seeing, I love it when it does this. The real estate, this fun little document, and in the corner up here it says South Carolina Real Estate License Law. Give me a thumbs up if you see that. Awesome. All right. So For those of you that are dying to know where you can find this information, it is in section 5 under the duties of licensed brokers in charge and agents. And it talks about an offer rejected without a counter, an offer rejection form that is promulgated by the commission, signed by the licensee, affirming the presentation of the offer must. What does it mean when it says must?
You got to do
Have
it.
to do it.
It is not an optional. It does not say shall or may. It says must be provided to the offeror by the licensee, which is you, whether you're the agent of the buyer, the seller, or acting as a transaction broker. Okay. So an offer rejection form, and technically as this reads, would also be a counteroffer to the buyer. But today we're talking about it from or to the buyer, I should say. But today we're talking about it as it relates to representing the seller. Okay. So this is where it states any and all. So to clarify really, really quickly, if you are negotiating and your client does not wish to move forward anymore, as the law is written, you have to present them what is called a rejection of offer form. Okay. And there are 2 options for that. It does not say which one. It just says it has to be one of them from the real estate commission. And there are 2 options, and both of these options are in DocuSign and Zip forms. The first one, and I always go to South Carolina Realtors Association page just for quick reference, instead of, you can go into DocuSign. Well, the first one is form 312, which is the rejection of offer or counteroffer form soliciting a new offer. Okay, we're going to come back to that one because that's the more complicated one and the one that you would use in multiple offers. And then you have form 314, which is the rejection of offer form, real estate offer rejection form. Okay, so we'll pull that up so we can see what this looks like. Very simple form. Basically what this says is it says that basically pursuant to South Carolina law, this offer rejection form is basically created by the Real Estate Commission for use when a real estate purchase offer is rejected without a counter offer. A signed copy of this form is to be provided to the buyer. So if you get an offer on this, now AJ is saying, hey, what about if it's a counter offer? That's essentially the same thing, right? So a counter offer is just another offer in there. Then you would fill this form out as the listing agent, and you would send it basically stating that the seller has rejected this offer and is not choosing to make any sort of counter offer.
Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but would you have to do that for each offer in a multiple offer situation?
You technically would. Now, in a multiple offer situation, we would use the next form, which we'll come back to.
Okay.
Unless,
Oh, yeah, for the,
all right, hold on one second. Let me close up AJ's, and then I know a couple people that have questions. Unless, AJ, any of those were just offers that you, for whatever reason, your seller did not want to pursue any further. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you get 5 offers on it, and one of them comes in, and for whatever reason, the seller says, I'm not interested in them countering for whatever reason it may be, right? Or bringing up another offer. You would actually send this form to them, form 314. The others, you'd use the other form.
Okay.
Because the other one actually calls for multiple offer should you think that you have it. Okay. A couple other questions. What were they?
Yeah, I have one. I
Okay.
just don't know why the sellers don't have to sign it. I always get my sellers to sign it so that the buyer knows that it's just not me,
Right. Yeah. And the second form, honestly, Gene, does allow that. Right. So let's go on to the second form, because the other option that you have on here is for form 312. Form 312 actually it is a rejection of offer. The difference is it is soliciting another offer. So if your seller's not soliciting the other offer, then you really technically wouldn't use this form. So your question as to why it doesn't have the seller's offer, that's a good question. Or seller's signature, that's a good question. That form does not. The form that does require the seller's signature is this one, which basically is stating, you put basically the name that basically stating that the seller's rejecting the offer or counter offer, the name of the buyers that would be on the offer, and then obviously the address of the property. Now this paragraph here in short basically says, we are not countering, we are encouraging you to come back with another offer. And here are some areas that I would say you at least need to hit as a minimum. right? So if you, I wouldn't spend a ton of time on this, quite honestly. If you're using this and it's not multiple, if you're using this in multiple offer, sure, you might want to put in there minimum price of 200,000, earliest closing date of October 15th, you know, whatever. If the seller has some of those non-negotiables, you might want to put that in there. And then it basically says that it discloses the potential of other buyers. At this point, you can give a deadline. I would not worry about at buyer's convenience or location. I would simply say before a certain time and date right here. And then it states that the seller intends to review all offers received at the stated deadline. Down here is where you would disclose that the seller does anticipate or does not anticipate the possibility of competing offers delivering their highest and best. This is where you would technically claim highest and best if you were sending this back to an offer that had already come in. Or you can make no representation of the possibility of competing offers, and we'll come back to why I don't think that's necessarily a great idea. Now, understand that as this form is written, it says seller desires buyers to have a level playing field to fairly compete at their highest and best offering terms, and so seller warns buyers not to use an escalator clause, but encourages presenting only the buyer's highest and best offering terms. So I'm going to do something really quickly here so you guys can have this in front of you in case you don't have it. So a couple things to keep in mind on this one. Hold on, I'm going to put this file in the chat box for you to. Oh, I thought I was. So 312. All right, so that should be in the chat box, but I'll have to send it to you here in a bit. All right, so a couple things on this. So number one, Form 312, the one that I just showed, let me pull it back up so you don't really need to see me. This form should only be presented in a multiple offer situation to someone who has actually submitted an offer. So if you do not have an offer from an agent yet, then this is not, you would not need to use this form. You could simply make that agent aware that it is a multiple offer situation. And if they do bring an offer in, then they need to bring in their highest and best. And that can be sent via an email, right? Say, hey, we have another offer on the table. If you are bringing an offer in as stated, then bring in your highest and best. You would then use this offer, Form 312, once you got that second offer, therefore making it a multiple offer situation. What you don't want to do, and this is, I mean, again, you're business owners, you can use your own strategy, but if I'm representing Camille as a seller, Jenna brings me an offer, and then AJ calls me and says, hey, I have an offer coming in. I'm going to tell AJ, hey, we currently have an offer on the table. And should you just, so if you should decide to put in an offer, you will be in a multiple offer situation, and I will send you an email making you, officially aware, bring in your highest and best. We currently have one on there. I would not say anything to Jenna until I have AJ's offer. I'd tell my seller, I'd say, Camille, I know we have this offer from Jenna, right? And AJ has called me and said that he has bringing an offer in. However, we do not currently have an offer on the table from him yet. So my advice is that we do not say anything into Jenna until we actually have an offer. Why would you not want to do that?
Because you don't know if you're going to get that offer.
Correct. So what happens if I go to Jenna and say, hey, we have another offer coming in, and Jenna's buyer happens to be one of those buyers who has zero desire to be in a multiple offer situation? They say, you know what, forget it, I'm out. And then AJ doesn't bring his offer.
Right.
Right. So just be very careful when you're protecting the seller. I get it. I know a lot of times you want to go to Jenna and say, hey, I got a call from so-and-so. They're bringing in an offer. You can argue that would create some urgency. You can also argue that could create some fear. So just be careful on telling too early. Now, AJ brings in an offer. I then am going to submit Form 312 back to Jenna to say, hey, we did, however, get an offer since you've submitted your offer. So here's the official offer rejection form calling for highest and best. If you want
But
to
you
change.
wouldn't have to do that to me because you've already given me an email.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's subjective. You could, if you wanted to be super, super formal, but if I'd already sent you an email, I would not send that in because I'm not currently rejecting your offer. Now, if the buyer looks at this, if Camille looks at it and says, well, no, his offer is crap anyway, so I want him to bring in another one, then the seller may opt to send one to say, hey, just as an extra reminder, we're rejecting this because of multiple offers. You need to come up.
Gotcha.
Okay. Now, let's say this happens 5 times over. That's what you do 5 times. You send that to them. They all bring back in their highest and best. I now have an offer from, 5 different people. When I then agree to take AJ's as highest and best, I then need to go back with the form of rejection of offer, letting them know that they are not going to be countering on the other 4. I do not make the rules. I can see in some of your faces, the few that I can see, that this is the wonderful good news you wanted about rejection of offer form. Right? It
Seems like a lot of work.
It is an extra step. I understand that. And put yourself in the buyer's agent shoes. You submit an offer. You've now gone back and said, we've got multiple offers, or, hey, you really need to put in a strong offer. It's a hard market right now. Here are all the things that you need to do. And then you need to go back in and you do all this work and then you submit it and you don't get anything back to then give to your seller other than, hey, we didn't hear back from them.
I have a question.
Okay.
Because that actually just recently happened to me. So like as a buyer's agent, I mean, how do you get another agent to send you that? When they're, they don't find it to be, needed.
Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. I mean, and a lot of people, including people within our company, just because this isn't a well-known rule, like that's just kind of snuck in and a lot of people don't use it. Don't automatically assume that the person's just being a jerk. Not to say that's not often happening. But I would just, yeah, I mean, I don't, I would say right now, if you were to do a poll of the real estate industry in Charleston, the majority of agents don't realize this is a required form.
Yeah.
So I would go to that and say, listen, I'm not trying to be a pest. However, here's, just from South Carolina law, copy and paste that in there and say, just, this is why I'm asking for it, is because my buyers understand that this is required. So when nobody's giving it to them, unfortunately, it's stressing them out a little bit.
Right. And then my other question on that same deal, instead of formally countering, he kept trying to like write an email counter. So, I mean, what's the advice, because I went back and forth with him a few times and said, I'm not doing it this way. You need
Right.
to counter it properly because this means nothing.
Right.
But, like,
Yeah, so there's a couple different things on there. The big thing, with that, the rule about putting it on paper and it being a duty to put it on paper is very vague about whose responsibility that is, right? Or they say put it in writing. At some point, one could default to say, well, even if that agent's refusing to do so, it might be your obligation at that point to put it on paper and submit to your client because you've got it via email. I will, until the very end, I know that times are changing, blah, blah, blah. I will to the very end say the absolute best way to handle this is to put it on paper. I appreciate that takes time. I appreciate people are busy. I also appreciate that you're a fiduciary representative of one of the largest transactions this person will ever probably facilitate. So to go put it in writing is, in my opinion, not too much to ask, and quite honestly, a very lazy way to handle it. That being said, I understand that there are some extenuating circumstances. So Waverly, to your specific situation, if you've got an offer you've submitted and then the listing agent keeps coming back with just a counter via email, at some point, you just need to decide whether or not that's the hill you're going to die on, or then go to your buyer and say, listen, here's the deal. This is what I've gotten as a response.
right.
I'm going to put this on a form, or you can just chat with them to say, you walk a fine line between being an alarmist and protecting your client.
Well,
Right.
the situation that arose was my client didn't feel confident that the seller had even viewed anything. And so as much as I navigated it, and I said, we can just write our own offer if that's the terms and you're okay with it. But they got it in their head that they were negotiating with the listing agent and
Yeah.
not the
And
seller.
that's what typically happens. Now, two things I'll and again, Waverly, I'm not picking on you. This happens all the time. Two things. First thing I'll encourage you is not to assume that that's what's happening, and then you project that emotion on your buyer, right?
Yeah,
And that-
I don't feel like I did, but
Right. No. And I'm not saying that you did. I just a lot of times people that will. And then number two, you do want to relay that back to the listing agent to say, listen, I understand that this is a lot of work for you. However, right now my buyer's concern is that the sellers have never even seen it. And by us now putting it and then signing it and sending it back, we don't even know that they're rejecting the first one. If they keep pushing back, quite honestly, shoot an email to the broker or shoot an email to me, and I'll call the broker. I do think that's a broker worthy call if your buyer does have that concern.
yeah.
Which, by the way, brings me to this point. Like a lot of people, let me be very clear. I am happy to make that call, and that call can also be made by you. To just say, hey, I need your help on this and that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that to push it back on you. I just know a lot of brokers draw this hard line about whether or not they want their agents talking to other brokers. I don't want you talking to other brokers about their company. However, if they're, if you've got an issue with their agent, all you're, bringing me in, sure, I will be more than happy to help. But sometimes a simple call to that broker can be like, hey, can you help me out on this? And they'd be glad to do so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see. Question came in and says, if you have one potential buyer drop out of a multiple bid situation, do you have to do anything else? So I guess that would depend on the situation. If you have two buyers and one drops out, I would, keep the email that says they're dropping out or whatever notice they put on there, but you would not have to do anything further with them. Unless, well, technically you still would have to send them a rejection form if you had not already sent the one calling for highest and best from that standpoint. Okay, what else? What confusions or anything that you have on the multiple offer situation? Because I know that's why, I
Well,
know.
Scenario you just gave, if there are only two in the multiple offer, do you let the other party know that there's no longer someone at the table?
So if you go back, well, okay, so let's just go back to the original one. Jenna's got an offer in, and then AJ brings the offer in, and he already knew to do it highest and best.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you go tell Jenna says, hey, my clients are out. Do you let AJ know?
That's it. Yeah, that would
That's
be
your question. At that point, you don't have the obligation to do so because they've already submitted the offer. Right.
okay.
You've already let him know. And at the time it was a multiple offer. You're not obligated to go back and say, well, the other one dropped out.
What if
Right.
it's not submitted yet? Would it be ethically the right thing to do?
If they had not submitted the second offer yet,
Yeah.
I would not tell the first offer until the second offer is submitted.
No, if someone dropped out before that other offer was submitted.
Oh, just for general reasons, they just dropped out for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd go through and start calling people, say, no, that offer went away. No.
Okay.
If you had an offer on the table at the time, that was your duty to disclose. I think after that,
Okay.
I don't think I'd continue to posture in a multiple offer situation though. Right. I would just at that point say, this is kind of how the chips fell on that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. If a buyer's agent sends you an offer with an expiration day and time that they know will have passed by the time you're able to review it, is the offer valid? Yeah. So this is a good one. And I know the agent who's asking this just recently had this. So the question is, if a buyer's agent submits an offer and you say, hey, if you're submitting an offer, first of all, in every situation, a side note, as a buyer's agent, conflict only rises when there's a difference in expectation. Okay. Your job as part of the negotiation is to prevent as much conflict as possible. So if you're a buyer's agent, I think one of the first things that you should do when you're submitting an offer is actually have a conversation, which a conversation, I'm not properly defining it, but it's basically a two-way interaction. Okay, just want to make sure everybody remembers that, right? To set some expectations of what I can expect from you as a listing agent to when it comes to submitting this offer, right? So if I'm going to call AJ and say, hey, I'm going to submit an offer, is there anything I need to know about the timelines or anything like that? And AJ says to me, well, just know that my sellers are out of town, so it may take some time. My sellers are, one's deployed, it may take some time. As a buyer's agent, I would recommend just ask that, just so you're not submitting an offer on a Friday night to hear back from by Saturday at noon. Okay. So if that happens to the specific question, they submit it Friday night, say they want to hear back by Saturday at noon, and you get it Saturday morning, and you're not able to submit it to your client until 11 o'clock for whatever reason, and your client doesn't respond, or you don't get it to your client by noon, it is no longer a valid offer. Now, does that mean that you can't still reply to it and strike the expiration and rewrite that? Of course you can. But at that point, it's a dead offer, right? And at any time up to that point, the buyer can rescind it. So the question is the offer valid? It would be what's considered voidable, meaning if someone accepted it after the fact and the date on there stated, that it was signed after the expiration, you could technically call it a voidable contract, which is why it'd be smart to clean it all up and make sure you don't do that. Now, what this also brings up, because this happens all the time, is you've got a hot listing that comes on the market, and the first agent that shows it wants to get a response right away. So they show it and they submit it now, and they want an answer by 5 because they don't want to be beat out by another offer. Again, I don't know if this is an argument or being the hill that I'm going to die on. However, as a buyer's agent, and I understand people want to do this and they get mad if the seller doesn't respond in time, you've got to put yourself in the seller's shoes to say, this is nice that I've got an offer, but I've got 15 more showings over the next 72 hours. Your timeline isn't going to make that person act any faster, for the most part, in my opinion. So a lot of people will get upset because they've submitted this quick timeline and the seller doesn't get back to them. Well, that's the seller's decision at the end of the day. Now, you need to advise your seller if you're the listing agent. And I sit down with Jan and say, Jan, we've got an offer, and I know we've got 10 more showings this weekend. This offer expires on Friday at noon. Here's what I'm obligated to tell you. After this, you do not have an offer. So if you do not reply to this offer by Friday at noon, and all those 10 showings, nobody submits an offer, then we've missed the opportunity on this. I just want to, I'm not trying to tell you that to pressure in responding. I will do whatever you tell me to do. It's my obligation to tell you that afternoon on Friday, this offer is expired. I just want you to be aware of that to balance the risk of whether or not you want to wait and see if anything else comes in.
How prudent would it be to go back to that buyer agent and just explain that scenario and say, hey, look, we just hit the market. Inventory is extremely low. We do have one offer in hand. However, I've got 11 other showings in the next 24 hours. Would your buyer be willing to push the expiration date back? I mean, is that feasible, or are you just an idiot?
No, I don't think you're an idiot. You absolutely can do that. You, of course, are going to, and the buyer's agent should assume that. Just understand that a lot of times that person will the buyer will often not react well because they think, well, you're just shopping offers. Well, I'm, first of all, as a listing agent, not doing anything. I'm following, I'm representing my seller. And then B, possibly, I mean, again, I understand that doesn't work out great for your buyer, and I'm sorry, yet this is what the seller has instructed me to do in this situation.
Okay. I mean, I'm probably going into that situation this weekend. So
right. Yeah. Well, the other thing is if you get that call from the listing agent as the buyer's agent, say, listen, okay, then go back to your buyer and say, look, they want to wait till this weekend. Obviously, we don't have to, or if you want, we can resubmit
biggest and best
at an offer that may make them not wait.
Right.
So
I have a question about the previous scenario.
yes.
So you say to follow those timelines, receive the offer Friday night, expires Saturday at noon, and say you get back to them Saturday after 12 o'clock with a counter and expiration.
Mhm.
At which point he responds, then it is no longer voidable, correct?
As long, so it is not voidable as long as the seller, well, technically, so acceptance or rejection happens when notice is given. Okay, so we're getting super technical on this, yet it's a good question because this situation does cause a lot of heartburn. So in that situation, Julie, if you had submitted the offer to me, it was due to, it expired tomorrow at noon. So that technically means that you have to be made aware of what my client's response is prior to noon for it not to be voidable. So not only do I have to, not only has the client, should the client have countered or accepted by noon, I will have then needed to let you know by noon. Because it's notice of acceptance that actually would count in that one. So so both of those would have to happen. It'd have to be signed prior to that date, as well as the notice would have to be sent to you prior to that date and time.
Okay.
These are fun. What other scenarios?
Going back to the 5 multiple offer situation,
Yes, sir.
say I get that first offer. I let everybody know, yes, I do have 1 offer on the table. We're expecting potentially 3 to 4 more, whatever the scenario is.
Right.
I get that second offer. I get the third offer, the 4th offer, whatever. So I call all these people back. I now have 4 written offers on the table. I submit form 312, correct?
Back to all of them?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Say after I submit the 312 form to everybody, then my seller chooses offer number 2. Do I have to reject the other 3 at that point? Or can I do it via email?
So in the event, so it all based on whether or not they submit an additional offer, another offer.
Okay.
So let's say you send that back to 5 of them. 3 of them say, hey, we came in with highest and best, so go with that one.
Okay.
Then you've technically done what you needed to do at that point. If they did resubmit, you would need to send them form 314 if they were not going to accept it.
Okay. So just the straight rejection form then,
Yep.
saying, hey, we chose our person, good to go.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Good questions. What else? All right. So multiple offers, quick review again. I'm going to bounce. I'm going to jump back to this and then we can open it up for free for all, which makes me nervous. So you're looking at form 312 right now, hopefully. This is the one that you would use if you are soliciting a new offer or if you are in a multiple offer situation. Now, again, I personally don't love this sentence right here. Seller warns buyers not to use escalator clauses, but encourages presenting only the buyer's highest and best offering terms. I don't really know if this is the soapbox I want to get on right now. However, you just need to understand that if by sending this form, you're basically telling the buyer's agent not to do an escalation clause, which is a quick review. If you don't know, it's basically an offer that says, I'm going to offer you 2 to 10, but my buyer will pay all the way up to 2 whatever to beat out any other offer. And it has some stipulations that are in there. I'm not going to go into the details. The LLR does not like it. Well, I should say the South Carolina Association of Realtors doesn't like it. There's nothing illegal about it. Now, it can cause a little muddiness to the water, right? Because is it really highest and best if they're willing to do another price? But that form, just understand, says don't do that. And then the second form that you have, if it is not a multiple offer situation, is form 314, which basically is only signed by you as the agent. It's a standard form, also in DocuSign. You just drop the information on there. You sign it to come back to them to just let them know that, hey, I am affirming that I did submit this offer to my client and they have rejected it. Sound good? Everybody clear as mud on it?
Yep.
Further questions? All right. What else is going on? Free for all. Let's mastermind. What other questions are going on as it relates to contracts? AJ.
I've got one that relates to the one you just did. On SCR 504 sale contingency.
Yes.
I missed the class, the Zoom. I had an appointment. I actually watched the video. Kristen sent me your video,
Okay.
which had actually answered a couple other questions I have, but I'm currently in that situation now. And I believe the verbiage as it's stated says buyer's deadline on that actual form. I took that as, and I figured it out since, that deadline refers to the actual closing date that they set in the initial offer, correct?
Not exactly. So good question. So let's go to this. So this is form 504. This is the form that would be used if a buyer has a home to sell in order to be able to purchase the home they're currently under contract. So what AJ's talking about is in this contract, it refers to the buyer's deadline. Okay. The buyer's deadline is defined in paragraph 2. Okay. Buyer's deadline is selected in negotiations. It's based on their property selling based on this time frame right here. So your buyer's deadline, basically, you've got to select one of these two, AJ. So it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be so many days prior to the closing date of their current contract or on the closing date of the home they're purchasing.
Gotcha. They chose the closing date in that situation.
Okay.
And I went over this for about 45 minutes with my seller, just this one piece of paper.
Right.
So we were once again clear as mud, as you say,
Right.
when it was all said and done.
Right.
No, I mean, she got it. She understood it. But they are approaching that closing date. We are
Okay.
exactly 2 weeks out.
Mm-hmm.
They do not have a ratified contract at this point on that.
Right.
So I guess the catch-22 for me as the selling agent with this contingency in place, I mean, the likelihood that they're going to pull this off is slim to none unless they run into a cash buyer like tomorrow.
Right.
I guess my question is on this then, would they be in breach of contract as of the closing date? At which point we renegotiate the terms or terminate the contract?
Okay. So a couple clarifying questions. When you say, would they be in breach of contract, who do you mean?
The buyers, because they did not meet the deadline.
No, they would not be in breach yet. So what would happen is you now look at, we'll go jump back on the form. So what happened is you now go and look and say, okay, buyers, what happens should the sale of the buyer's property not close by the deadline, the buyer can terminate this contract by notice and deliver no more than blank calendar's day after the buyer's sale deadline. Okay, so you can, this basically says I'm putting you on notice to say, hey, my property is not closing by the buyer sale deadline. And I have to do that within blank calendar days of this deadline up here.
Gotcha.
Now, it's a little vague in this situation because let's take your current situation. I know that I'm not going to close on that. So could I send that notice now? That's a vague one, right?
Right.
How, if I'm the seller, I might want to give them more time. In the second paragraph, it said, should the buyer's property not close by the buyer's sale deadline, seller may terminate this contract by notice the buyer delivered no later than blank calendar day after the sales deadline, unless parties agree of any of these. Cash buyer verifies purchase or buyer's financing is not contingent. Well, that wouldn't apply to either one of these. So the question becomes for you is currently right now, can your seller go terminate the contract because we clearly aren't going to hit their deadline? The way it's written, it's not that clear because the way it's written, it says, should the buyer's home not close by the buyer's deadline, which that non-incident has not happened yet, right?
That was where I was having trouble kind of say, well, if we technically they're not going to meet the deadline or the likelihood is very slim. I said, but think of it in terms of, one in the hand is better than two in the bush. I said, they may ratify this week with no sale contingency on their end, no harm, no foul. Yes, they didn't meet the deadline, but we just pushed the closing date back.
Correct.
You sell your house, we get a win-win.
Right. And at that point, you want to keep dialogue with your seller, and then go to and if the seller says, well, let's see if they'll let us put it back on the market, is go to the buyer's agent and say, hey, I know that we still have the deadline. However, clearly you guys are not going to hit it. My sellers would like to release. It's a little bit of an awkward situation because, like you said, is your seller really going to release if they get a really strong offer that the only thing's going to cause them to do is change their closing deadline? Right. So it's a little vague. It isn't that great. I'll tell you, it's hard to be looking at. I'm not seeing a lot of ratified offers with the backup or with this contingency clause in there without the buyer's home already being under contract.
Contract.
We rolled the dice on that one.
That was not I mean, that's depends on the situation. Yeah, that was painting with a very broad brush. I'm just saying that a lot of times that's why. However, like you said, if you've got a home that's not in a market where you're getting a ton of offers, it may not be a terrible idea.
Well, and it was the price point too. I mean, it's up there, and
yeah,
my client's urgency was like, you know what? Let's roll the dice, because the house that the buyers are selling is actually in a neighborhood that moves relatively quickly. So
right.
I figured, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Like,
right.
I would rather say, like, once again, one in the hand is worth two in the bush kind of deal. So I think what we've agreed to do at this point, having open dialogue with not only my sellers, but the buyer's agent as well, saying, hey, look, we haven't given up the fight yet. Pretty much, if you can show us a ratified contract in the next 10 days, we would be willing to extend this.
Right.
With a solid offer on the purchase to fulfill the contingency.
Right.
Like, we don't want to throw it out, but at the same time, if you come to me on November 2nd, when there's, the deadline, and you got nothing to show for, well, bye-bye. Like, at that point, we got to do what we got to do. So.
Right. Exactly. Camille, did you have a question?
I did. So if the seller's house goes under contract, we don't have to do the 504?
No, I'm saying if you're talking about the buyer's house.
No. Yes, the buyer's house. Yes.
You still want to use Form 504, but you can also change up the buyer's deadlines at that point.
Got it. It'll be a Pinot deadline. Okay, got it.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you.
A question came through the chat box about whether or not you can put the house back on the market and offer a first right of refusal to the current buyer. The short answer to that is no. The reason behind that is we don't have a contract that does first right of refusal. And if you did, that's a technical contract. So you'd have to put it as active contingent. And you don't want to get in this. We've just recently had this where a listing agent, basically the sellers did not want to take their home off the market because the buyer's house, was contingent on their house selling. Listen, I completely understand that sentiment, 100%. And it's not allowed. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have a contract on the house, it has to be marketed as active contingent in the MLS. Now, the question comes all the time is, could you tell the buyer's agent, or could you tell the listing agent, hey, just let us know if you get an offer and we want to submit back in there? I guess you could, but you just have no protection of your buyer at that point if you're the buyer's agent. So it's just something to weigh out. That's why it is important, because, by the way, this is something that if you want to be very careful, because again, not to get preachy, however, part of your job is to understand how to interpret the market to your clients. And, if you are advising your client on accepting an offer that's contingent on a home selling, you need to make sure that you give them all of the possible pitfalls, regardless of what the market may look like or what that offer may look like. Doesn't mean they still shouldn't accept it, but you want to make sure, like if you're in a situation where the home still hasn't gone under contract, that you've just advised them that that was one of the risks. That's all you do is, I mean, you advise them on the risks, they weigh out the pros and cons, you consult them on the best decision to make for themselves.
That's what I did, and they chose to stick with it.
Yep. And that's,
So
there you go.
not to say I told you so, but I was like, hey, that was a risk that we were aware of, and we'll just have to reassess when we get to that deadline.
Yeah.
You know,
And here's the deal. It made, listen, and the information they were given, it doesn't sound like it was a bad decision, right? It just isn't. Here's the other thing we have to understand is everyone looks right now is, and Parker, I'll get to your question. I just want to make sure you know I didn't forget about you. Here's the thing that we need to understand right now. Let me look something up really quickly. We are bringing in a lot of emotions. I don't typically like to bold law at people, but one of the best bold laws is keep your emotions between the lines. And one of the things that we need to do, and I'm going to pull up a stat that will kind of help you understand this a little bit. And I'm not speaking directly to AJ because I don't know anything about the timeline of his contract. But the fact that AJ's house that he has, the buyer that he has under contract for his house, the fact that their home has not gone under contract does not need to alarm anyone. But what happens is we're hearing about the market and the low inventory and everything like this, that, and the other. And people are freaking out when something doesn't go under contract right away. And when I say people, I'm just as guilty, right? I'm just as guilty. But what you want to look at right now, and I'm going to do an average. Actually, I'll do monthly because monthly will give you more of a micro market. This is a general question, but in the chat box, don't look it up. In the chat box, if I were to ask you what are the average days on the market is for homes selling in Charleston, what would you put? So just throw it in the chat box, what you think that number is. Three answers. Okay. All right. So a couple of things. First,
We're all wrong.
First, some of you ignored me and went and looked it up. And the reason I know that is you looked up the wrong number. You looked up medium, not average. So the average days on market for homes that closed in the month of September in the Charleston market was 45. That's 45 right now. Again, I can do this all day long. If it's a, you know, if it's below 350, it's 32, right? If it's below 200, it's 30, right? So, I mean, it moves around. The point is the average is not 3. And everyone thinks that it's 3 right now. They just think it. And so my point is on this is now we're bringing in some unneeded emotion. And I'm going to go again back to AJ's situation. Just because that person's home isn't under contract doesn't mean that's bad, right? They're still well within the average. Not that we just want to be average, but you just want to make sure you're interpreting the market correctly on that. So be careful that you're not painting with a broad brush across the market that it's just crazy right now. Homes are still selling quickly, yes, but they're not selling in a matter of time where if you don't have a contract in a couple of weeks that you need to be that concerned.
well, and the
Right.
explanation I gave them was similar to ours. You know, they were the biggest model, the biggest shiniest penny in that subdivision. You know, I mean, it's going to take time. I probably reiterated that a dozen times where I said, look, this is not going to be what you just said. Everyone thinks inventory's so low, I'll sell my house in 3 days at, you know, 20% over value or whatever. Like, I just told them, I said, hey, it is what it is. And it could take 3 weeks to a month potentially because of the price point we were in. So,
Right. Yeah. All right. So a question that came in specifically on form 504, which is the home sale contingency form. It says, how many calendar days do you typically allow past the closing date to extend the closing date or terminate if you aren't able to sell the contingent property in time? So specifically what that means, I'll jump back on that form. So specifically what that question is designed for is this right here. No later than blank calendar days after the buyer's sale deadline. Well, if I'm the buyer that wants to terminate, I want to give as many as possible. And if I'm the seller that wants to terminate, I want to give as few days as possible. I'm not, that all being said, I'm not seeing that being more than like 1 or 2 days, because at that point you have a pretty good idea of what the situation is. Because especially if it's a situation where the buyer sale deadline was the closing date, you're not going to want to give them a couple days after. Now, if I get an offer on a property, this just happened actually recently. We got an offer on the property and the buyer had a home to sell. However, their home was set to close the following week. And they asked for 5 days to give that notice just to buffer any delay in the closing. Okay, fine. I'm fine with that because I'm still well within the contract that they've got on my house. So, all right. Good questions. What else?
Joseph, I have a question that's related to a listing. If a listing is expired and there's notes down at the bottom of the listing that said, this house has just been removed because the lady's gonna have a baby and I'm still under a list, just to let you know, it's still under a listing agreement. Is that seems like that, if it's expired, it's expired. I mean,
Yeah, it's technically that really should be under
the temporary.
temporarily off the market. Let me answer this the best way I know how to answer this. We really only have expired, temporarily off the market, or canceled. Okay. By definition in the MLS, if it is marked expired or canceled, it is stating that we no longer have a listing agreement. Okay. So yes, you can, even if someone says in there, this person never wants to talk to a real estate agent again, don't ever call them. Basically, the rules are stating, hey, it's off the market. You can call them. If it's temporarily off the market, there is absolutely no gray area on this. Temporarily off the market means they still have a valid listing agreement in place and you cannot call the seller. So now you also want to use your judgment, right? If that one says, hey, she's taken off the market for a couple days, because they're having a baby and they're going to put it back on the market, I don't know the hill I'm going to die on is the fine print in the MLS, right? And then be the guy that calls that person. I'm not saying you can't, I'm just saying be careful on that. Technically, what would happen in that case is you should report the listing, because the listing should be in there as temporarily off the market. Because if they have an actual listing agreement in there and they're telling anybody about it, by the MLS rules, the Clear Cooperation rules, it technically has to be in the MLS as active.
How long can they stay temporarily off the market?
They don't have really any vague, there's no deadline right now. Now, if you're a listing agent who has your property temporarily off the market, the MLS will check in with you after 30 days. And what we're seeing, and what we're seeing is, as long as you give an explanation as to why they're off the market, the MLS they're just doing it for accuracy. They're not doing for policing. They just want to make sure if it's temporarily off the market and you still have a listing agreement, they're fine with that. They will just check in with you so you know, which not the purpose of this class, but when the MLS checks in with you on things like that, let them know. And I'm not saying that because they're going to continue to bug me. They're going to continue to bug you as well. Understand the MLS we're in business with them. It's not us. Let's get out of this us versus them thing. They're just simply want to make sure they keep the information accurate in there. So just respond to them. Yes, it's temporarily off the market because the mom's, expecting, or they just had a baby, or whatever it may be. And just let them know. Good question though. What else? Good. Y'all are just holding all your classes until Friday afternoon at 5:30, aren't you? Or all your questions. I kid. Jill, did you ask a question? Okay, no problem. Anybody else?
I don't want to dominate this thing, but I got another, going back to the SCR 504. That deadline is expired, and
Okay.
say my client wishes to terminate. At that point, because it's costing them, obviously, the longer we're off the market, they're still incurring costs, to maintain utilities and what have you.
Right.
Would it be a situation and I guess it comes down to the definition of unilaterally terminating. We put in there $2,500 earnest money if either party backs out. Would that be something? Because I know my client's going to ask me that. Like, hey, I've been off the market 45 days. It's costed me X amount of dollars. I think there should be some monetary compensation for that. What would be your recommendation as far as handling it from an earnest money acquisition standpoint? And we're not in the business to get earnest money. I get it.
Right.
But I know that my client will be like, I feel cheated. I just lost 45 days. I could have sold my house.
Right. Okay. So to clarify, let's say that comes up on the deadline and the buyer sends a termination. Can the seller get part of the earnest money?
Correct.
No, because
Okay.
it's written. They're both written for unilateral terminations, right? So let's just jump back on there. Casey, if you can hear me while I'm looking this up, are you talking about a kickout clause or a backup clause? Just put that in the chat and let me know. So let's go back to AJ's question on 504.
I'm sorry, man. I don't mean
No,
to dominate this.
I'm
It's
telling
just-
you, I promise you, you are not the only one who has these questions. By the way, if other people don't have that, that's why we've only literally had 1 or 2 people drop off the call, because most people know if they don't have a question now, they're going to have it at some point in time. So Form 504 basically states at this point, buyer may terminate this contract by notice to the seller. So basically, it's a unilateral termination. It's done at that point. Now, it's not to say that a seller may not fight it, right? This still goes back to the fact that earnest money can't just be unilaterally released,
Right.
right? But you can be released from the contract. Okay, so the kickout clause, let me see. Can you go to the kickout clause? Okay, so kickout clause is going back to Form 504. So basically what this is saying, hey, we're going to be under contract, and I'm going to market, I'm the seller, I'm going to market, get subsequent offers. Okay, now again, it's going to be marketed, as it says here, MLS rules may require categorization of seller's listing as other than active. By the way, if you would like to submit a formal request to the MLS board to say, hey, maybe we should get another status that says active home sale contingency, so that way you can just search for that to come in. That probably would be a bad idea. So here's what the kickout clause says, is it basically says if the seller gets an offer from a cash buyer or a subsequent offer that does not contain this form or a buyer sale contingency, right? So basically it's saying that it's a kickout clause that says I, as the seller, if I get another offer that is either cash or not contingent on a home sale. So it's got to basically be a better offer. When I deliver that notice to the buyer shall within however many days choose one of the following. 1, deliver documentation to the seller that the buyer's property is under contract of sale scheduled to close by buyer sale deadline with no contingencies other than financing and repairs. Or remove the contingency only if the home is not contingent, the financing is not contingent on the sale of the home. Okay. So basically what the kickout clause says, without bogging you down in the details, the kickout clause says is, if I give you notice, then you have to do one of 2 things. Remove the contingency, and you can only remove that contingency if your financing doesn't require you to sell your house, which 9 times out of 10 is not the case. Or you have to give me documentation that you have a home, that you have an offer in a contract to close on their home by that deadline, which you've probably already given anyway. Right. But in case you haven't, then you just have to show them as the buyer's agent or the buyer that you have your home under contract. There's no weird contingencies other than financing and repairs, and it's set to close by the buyer's deadline. So as long as they're under contract during that time, the buyer's protected. So does that answer your question, Casey? Awesome. Okay. Another question. Let me go through. Stronger offer in a 2 offer situation. If we are still within the deadline on the offer. Okay, so the question came in. This is a pretty interesting one. It says if we're we often end up negotiating the stronger offer in a 2 offer situation. If we are still within the deadline on the not as strong offer, we have no requirement to notify them that we are negotiating the first one. We do
Joseph,
that.
do I make sense? Do I make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Thanks.
Christy, I speak your language. Don't you worry.
Yeah, okay.
So basically, if you, this is actually a really good question. So you've got two offers that come in. They both, and I'm assuming they've all been notified. Everything's been handled properly. So bam, we've got two highest and best at this point. There's inevitably going to be one that's a little bit stronger. If they go negotiate the stronger one, are they obligated to tell the not as strong one that they're negotiating the other one until this one is figured out?
Wait, Joseph, can I clarify something?
Yeah.
I'm not saying they always would necessarily be the highest and best because, you typically, in a lot of times it's more like a luxury price point where there's 1,000 moving parts, right?
Right.
And so let's say the first one comes in, we might have told the second one coming in, there is a first one. But what if the first one is so clean, we think we can get them up to where we want to be? So what
You
often do,
absolutely can still negotiate with whatever one. Yeah, it's highest and best. It doesn't mean the highest price. It's and best.
but I
So you're
didn't
absolutely right on that.
necessarily I didn't like send them back to both. We just often end up, because we know what can happen with highest and best, both can walk away.
Right.
So we often, once we look at the two, let's say the second person did come in knowing the first existed.
Yeah.
We might just, instead of putting those words out there, highest and best, which don't sit well with people,
Mhm.
we might say, okay, Mr. First one, you're really your strong offer. We have another one on the table. Instead of asking you for highest and best, we'd like to negotiate to see if we can come to terms. Now, in the meantime, we don't always go and tell the second person, because if the first one falls apart, we don't want to set the stage for ticking them off before we go back. We don't have any obligation to say we're talking further with the first, do we? If we're within the dead.
It's a gray area. I see your point though.
I didn't worry till I sat here listening to the rest of everything you said. I was
right.
fine before today, but
Yeah, I mean, you can. I'm reading through the deadline on there. I think highest and best is quite honestly a term that we've deemed. It is in the fine print of the multiple offer part of it. At the end of the day, it's in that situation. This is a gray one. Actually, I'm gonna do a little bit of research.
well,
on this
I'm
one,
okay
right?
with that as long as you don't say I'm absolutely cannot do it, because I do think we try to be fair, and oftentimes it's the first one, but the price may not be the highest. But there's
Right.
so many other things that
Correct.
we think we can get to terms. They're putting 50% down on all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay, so two things have come from this. Number one, understand your job is to inform your seller of what's going on. At the end of the day, it's ultimately your seller's decision.
Yeah.
And so if Christy's talking to me and that's how she explains it to me and I'm her seller, I'm going to say, then yeah, let's talk to this first one and see what happens,
Yes.
right? Especially if you've let the second one know, right?
Yes,
At that point, I
yes.
think that's the, and then if the second one has been made aware, on an email versus Form 312 signed by everyone, I still think you've protected yourself on there. I don't think you're towing into any sort of gray area at that point. But just also understand that you explained to your seller, there is a chance that the second offer may not wait around. So it doesn't work out, they may still walk away.
I think we are clear, and don't get me wrong, even though I say this happens often, I know clearly it's the client's choice.
Right. I understand that.
But they do understand that highest and best is a scary thing. It's different when you're in a price point, you're going to get 10 offers.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like some of these, we might only get a second one and they may walk when they hear highest and best. So
Right.
anyway, so
Yeah.
good. Well, I just think that's what I was wondering, but
Regardless, though, you just tell both parties, hey, we're in a multiple offer situation, either via email or by Form 312, correct?
Well, that's what she's clarifying is in this situation, she would not say anything to the first offer because they'd already submitted it and they want to try to negotiate that one out.
Well,
first.
and Joseph, more than likely, the second one pretty much knew I had one coming in, but I don't so the second one usually knows. And then the first one, I probably do typically tell them, say, hey, listen, you were the first. My seller has said, let's work with you and see what we can do. But I don't go back in writing saying to the second, we're negotiating the first, because if the first never gets up to where the second was or something, we might just go, hey, we're negotiating your offer number 2. And now they're thrilled. They're the ones we picked.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you're obligated though to tell the second one that you do have an offer on the table.
And they usually already do because
yeah.
they're the ones that came in second. And
Correct.
but I hear you. Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily say the seller chose to negotiate the first one. So you hang tight. We sometimes don't tell them if we have time.
No, I don't think you're obligated to tell them which one you're negotiating. No.
That was kind of the biggest piece of that. I felt
Yep.
like maybe I wasn't saying something I was supposed to. But.
Yep. No, you're good.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Contracts. There you go. Never a dull moment. If you think of any other questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, this was great. I appreciate the free-for-all questions. I think that was helpful. I mean, those of you, and please don't ever apologize for questions, y'all. This is you people either have them along with you or will have them at some point in time. And by the way, you heard all of this, it all made complete sense, and then you go back to life and you'll forget all of it, and that's fine. Just let me know. Don't hesitate to reach out, shoot me an email, call me. Good luck. Go write some offers, stir some stuff up so we can have some chats on what we need to fix. I'm kidding. Delete that part out, Tiffany. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Have an
Thank
awesome
you.
afternoon. Thank you.